The ballroom glittered with chandeliers that spilled golden light across polished marble floors, and every surface seemed designed to dazzle. Crystal glasses clinked in rhythmic harmony. Laughter rose and fell like the swell of music, and the murmur of polite society wrapped the night in a thin veil of elegance. She stood close to the edge of the crowd, her palms clammy against the satin fabric of her dress, her heart pounding far louder than the orchestra playing in the background. Tonight was supposed to be uneventful, a quick appearance to support her colleague, and then a quiet exit before anyone of importance noticed her. But fate rarely respected careful plans. Her ex noticed her almost instantly. He was already encircled by friends, their suits gleaming, their gowns glittering, their smiles practiced to perfection. His laugh rang out across the room, sharp and familiar, and when his gaze landed on her, it was as if time froze. He lifted his glass high enough for the group around him to follow his eyes. Their collective smirks cut through her like a blade. "So there she is," he called out, his voice purposely loud enough to travel. The girl who never knew her place, still trying to sneak into worlds she does not belong in. The chuckles that followed were like knives slicing through her composure. Heat rushed into her cheeks and humiliation coiled in her stomach. At 28, she believed herself hardened against his cruelty. Yet the words still burned as if she were that same naive girl he had once ridiculed in front of his friends. The wound reopened in an instant. Around her heads turned and smiles sharpened, polite but merciless. Each look carried judgment, each whisper pressed her further into the corner of her own shame. She shifted back her heels, tapping against marble, the exit too far away, every step backward, shrinking her presence further. Her ex savored her discomfort, his smirk widening. "You know," he continued with venomous charm, "some people never learn. They keep reaching above their station, hoping to catch a little glitter." The laughter swelled again, wrapping around her like a suffocating cloak. Her chest tightened, her breath faltered, and panic surged through her like fire. Her mind screamed for escape, for a way out, for anything to sever the humiliation crushing her. Then suddenly there was an answer. A hand appeared near hers, strong and steady, unflinching against the storm of ridicule. She did not think. Instinct propelled her fingers to close around it, trembling yet desperate, the grasp of someone drowning who had finally found a rope. His hand was warm, firm, a quiet anchor in chaos. The moment their palms met, a current of steadiness coursed through her, a contrast so sharp it left her breathless. He did not recoil. Instead, he turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on her ex and the smug circle surrounding him. His eyes were calm, his jaw unyielding, and the silence that followed was more powerful than any raised voice. The laughter faltered. Recognition spread like ripples through the crowd. At 35, he carried himself with the weight of authority that needed no introduction. The immaculate lines of his tailored suit spoke of wealth, but his presence spoke of power. He was the billionaire whose name was whispered in boardrooms, the man who appeared rarely, but whose movements shaped entire markets. And now he stood with her, their hands clasped, as if they had always belonged together. She dared to glance up at him, searching for clues in his expression. His face was unreadable, carved in control, but the subtle tightening of his fingers around hers told her the truth she needed most. She was protected. A hush spread through the ballroom, thick and electric. The mocking circle shifted uneasily, their bravado crumbling beneath the stranger's gaze. Even her ex stumbled, the cruel smirk fading into uncertainty. For the first time that night, silence belonged to her, not to him. She barely comprehended what she had done. One reckless impulse, one desperate attempt to shield herself from humiliation, had tethered her to a man far removed from her small existence. Yet as her ex's laughter died, and the crowd's stares softened into curiosity, all she could feel was the steady weight of that hand grounding her. The shame that had threatened to drown her ebbed away, replaced by tension, then by an unexpected calm. Her heart still hammered, but each breath came easier. She realized she was standing taller, not because she had found courage on her own, but because she had borrowed it from the stranger beside her. Gratitude tangled with disbelief. She had wanted to vanish into shadows, but instead she was thrust into the brightest spotlight of her life. And still his hand did not let go. In that moment, with the entire room watching, she understood that everything had changed. The stranger was no longer just a stranger. He was her shield, her silent ally, the beginning of a story she had never dared to imagine. The weight of his hand in hers did not falter as the silence deepened in the ballroom. She could feel every curious gaze fixed upon them, the atmosphere shifting from ridicule to stunned fascination. Her ex, so smug only moments ago, looked unsettled, his confident posture shrinking as if the very air had betrayed him. The billionaire, calm and composed, turned his head slightly toward her. His voice, low enough for only her to hear, carried an authority that soothed and unnerved her all at once. "If you are going to hold my hand, then allow me to introduce you properly." She blinked up at him, startled. Before she could protest, he faced the crowd, his arm guiding hers with subtle possession. "This is my date," he said smoothly, his tone carrying across the ballroom with practiced ease. A ripple ran through the room like a sudden breeze. Conversations halted, glasses froze midair, and eyes widened in disbelief. Her ex's smirk collapsed, completely replaced by visible shock. The name of this man, powerful, untouchable, rolled silently across the room, lips moving in hushed recognition. She, the girl once laughed at, for never belonging, had just been claimed by the one person no one dared question. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to yank her hand back, to scream that it was not true. Yet the warmth of his palm steadied her trembling fingers and anchored her feet to the marble floor. Her ex stepped forward, his voice breaking the fragile quiet. "You expect us to believe this?" His laugh cracked under pressure, desperate, brittle. But the billionaire's gaze, dark and unwavering, pinned him in place. "Believe it or not," he replied coolly, "is irrelevant. What matters is she is with me tonight." No one dared laugh now. The orchestra hesitated, faltered, and then resumed timidly, as if aware they were merely background to the true drama unfolding. She wanted to disappear into the floor, yet a strange sense of safety wrapped around her. The stranger's grip was firm, not demanding, but protective, as though his hand declared to the world she would not be mocked again. After the gala resumed its rhythm, whispers continued, but no one approached them directly. Her ex retreated into the shadows of the crowd, his pride clearly bruised, but his eyes still lingered with poisonous resentment. She knew this was not over, but for tonight, the fire of his humiliation was smothered. Hours later, when the gala dwindled and guests began to leave, she slipped away to the edge of the grand staircase outside. The night air was crisp, the city lights winking below, and she finally dared to release the hand she had clung to like salvation. She turned to the stranger with a flush of embarrassment burning across her cheeks. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I should not have." He cut her apology short with a slight lift of his brow, amusement glinting in his eyes. "You needed help. I was there. It was simple." She shook her head, mortified. "You do not understand. They will talk. They already thought less of you," he interrupted firmly. "I saw it in their eyes. And yet you stood your ground. You did what was necessary. That is not shameful. That is survival." His words struck a chord deep inside her words that felt heavier than casual reassurance. She lowered her gaze, staring at her trembling fingers. He glanced at her hand, still quivering from the storm of emotions, and reached out, deliberately enclosing it once more. "If you are going to take my hand," he said softly, "do not let go so easily." Her breath caught her heart stuttering with a confusion she could not name. Gratitude, attraction, disbelief, all colliding into a storm. "I did not even know your name," she murmured, realizing the absurdity of it all. Perhaps he said the corner of his mouth, curving faintly, that makes it more interesting. She could not decide whether he was teasing or simply enigmatic. Either way, she pulled her hand back gently, this time though the phantom of his touch lingered stubbornly against her skin. They parted that night with only the echo of a gaze, yet the memory of his calm claim in front of the world refused to leave her. She replayed it over and over on her way home, each repetition, stirring new waves of confusion. Who was he really beyond the name and reputation whispered in expensive rooms? And why had he, a man with limitless options, chosen to shield her? The following days brought consequences. Her ex, humiliated in front of his peers, took to social media with venom. Posts dripping with sarcasm spread quickly, subtle enough to avoid legal repercussions, but pointed enough that everyone knew who they were about. "Some people will do anything to get ahead," he wrote, "even attach themselves to wallets bigger than their own worth." The comments erupted, speculation fed the fire, and soon the whispers of that gala night spilled into headlines. "Mysterious woman on billionaire's arm," the articles screamed with grainy photos of her clutching his hand under the chandeliers. Her stomach knotted as she scrolled through the mess. At 28, working quietly as a PR assistant in a small company, she had neither the power nor the resources to fight such noise. Each word chipped away at her confidence, dragging back the old fears of being less than, of being nothing but the butt of someone's cruel joke. Then, like an echo returning at the exact moment it was most needed, a card slipped from the pocket of her purse where she had tucked it absent-mindedly that night. Heavy, cream-colored, embossed with his name and a number. She stared at it, fingers trembling, the memory of his voice circling in her mind. "If you are going to hold my hand, do not let go so easily." She swallowed, conflicted, torn between pride and desperation. Calling him would mean admitting she needed help again, but pretending she could withstand the storm alone felt impossible. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his face intruding on her thoughts. The memory of the calm weight of his hand steadied her restless mind. The world had changed in one impulsive moment, and though she feared what might come next, she could not deny the flicker of hope he had sparked within her. The glare of her phone screen was the first thing she saw the next morning, and with it came the storm she had feared. Notifications poured in endlessly, each headline more suffocating than the last. Photos of her hand entwined with his dominated every feed, the captions spinning wild narratives. Some called her a mystery, others labeled her a gold digger, and the cruelest comments echoed the voice of her ex, reducing her existence to a joke played out in front of strangers. Her chest tightened with every swipe shame clawing up her throat. But beneath it all was a coil of anger. She had fought for years to step away from his shadow, to build even the smallest life for herself, and now one desperate act had dragged her back into the spectacle she wanted so badly to avoid. Her job, steady though modest, was the next casualty. When she walked into the office that morning, whispers rose like smoke. Colleagues who once barely noticed her now watched every move, their eyes filled with speculation. By noon, her manager called her into a glass-walled room and closed the door with the kind of weary sigh that spoke of pressure from above. "We need to be careful," he said gently but firmly. "Your name is in the press, and while I know none of this is your fault, the optics could reflect poorly on us. Take a few days off, let this die down." His words, though framed with sympathy, landed like a blade. The steady rhythm of her days, her source of dignity, was slipping away because the world believed she had clung to a man for status. She left the office with a hollow pit in her chest, the weight of humiliation pressing down heavier than ever. On the bus ride home, she scrolled again through the endless swirl of posts until she stumbled on one that twisted the knife deeper. Her ex had posted a picture of himself with his new girlfriend smiling. Wide the caption dripping poison, glad some people finally found someone willing to pay their tab. Laughter exploded in the comments, his friends egging him on their cruelty, as casual as breathing. Her throat burned and she slammed the phone face down into her bag, fighting tears in front of strangers. That was when her fingers brushed against the card. Cream-colored, embossed heavy with quiet authority. She pulled it out, staring at the neat letters of his name. The memory of that night came back sharply, the steadiness of his gaze, the weight of his hand, the unspoken promise that she was not alone. Her pride battled her need until her hands shook from the pressure. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to withstand this on her own. She had promised herself never to depend on another man again. Not after the way her ex had ground her spirit into the dirt. But the humiliation was louder than her pride, louder than her fear. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the sound of the city pressing against the thin walls, she dialed the number on the card. It rang once, twice, and then a voice rich and steady filled her ear. "I wondered how long it would take before you called." Her breath caught startled by the familiarity in his tone, as though he had expected this moment all along. "I should not have," she whispered, shame coloring her words. "But it is unbearable. The posts, the gossip, the things they are saying about me. My job, I might lose it." There was silence on the other end, a silence so controlled it steadied her trembling voice. Then calmly he said, "You will not lose anything, not while I can prevent it." She squeezed her eyes shut, torn between relief and panic. "But I cannot be seen as someone who hides behind you. They will call me worse than they already have." His voice softened, but the authority never wavered. "They will talk no matter what you do. That is the nature of people who envy what they do not understand. What matters is how you hold yourself while they do it." Do you trust me? The question struck deep. Trust was the one thing she had guarded most carefully since the wreckage of her past. Yet as she held the phone to her ear, the memory of his hand around hers was impossible to shake. That steady warmth had carried her through a room of wolves. Slowly, hesitantly, she whispered, "Yes." A pause, then a quiet exhale. "Good. Then let me shield you from the noise. You do not have to fight this alone." After the call ended, she sat in the dim light of her small apartment, the words still echoing inside her. Part of her wanted to believe him completely, to lean into the certainty of his protection, but another part feared what it meant to let anyone so powerful into her fragile life. Sleep came late that night, restless and broken. Her dreams filled with hands reaching for her, some to pull her down, others to lift her up. When she woke, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, but there was also a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not relief, not exactly. Something quieter, sharper. Hope. The following evening, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, yet she knew instantly it was him. The words were short, precise, leaving no room for doubt. Dinner tomorrow, 8 o'clock. The address followed a restaurant whose name alone spoke of exclusivity. She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend she had never seen it, but curiosity pressed harder than caution. Sleep evaded her that night as she turned over the decision again and again. By the next evening, she found herself standing outside the restaurant, nerves tightening her stomach into knots. The facade was sleek, modern glass and steel, its doors flanked by staff in tailored uniforms. She smoothed her dress, a simple navy piece she had borrowed from a friend, hoping it would be enough. Inside, the air smelled faintly of truffle and wine, and soft jazz trickled through hidden speakers. She was led past rows of tables filled with polished diners into a secluded corner where he waited. He rose as she approached, tall and commanding in his tailored suit, his presence cutting through the dim lighting like a flame. "You came," he said, his voice low, and even as if he had known she would. "I almost didn't," she admitted, forcing a steady tone, though her heart beat wildly. But curiosity got the better of me. His mouth curved slightly, the closest thing to a smile she had yet seen. Curiosity is often the beginning of something worthwhile. He guided her into a chair, his hand brushing her arm, in a gesture both subtle and grounding. The table between them glowed with candlelight silver cutlery and crystal glasses catching the flicker. For a moment she felt small and out of place, a waitress at a table meant for queens. He seemed to sense it instantly. "Do not look at them," he murmured, when her eyes darted to the other guests. "Look at me." She obeyed reluctantly at first, then more steadily, as his gaze drew her in. There was no mockery there, no judgment, only a calm intensity that steadied her nerves. The waiter poured wine, but she shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. I need a clear head." He nodded approvingly, lifting his own glass, but not pressing her further. They began with safe topics, her work, his business, but even surface-level questions seemed to cut deeper under his steady attention. Every answer she gave felt heard, every hesitation noticed. She tried to mask her unease with polite smiles, yet his eyes lingered as if reading what she did not say. When the first course arrived, delicate plates of seared scallops, she found her appetite gone. He noticed immediately. "You are uncomfortable," he observed, not accusing, simply stating truth. She flushed, setting her fork down. This is not my world. I feel like I don't belong." His gaze sharpened, then softened almost imperceptibly. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers with quiet certainty. The warmth of his skin against hers made her chest tighten. "You belong wherever you decide to stand," he said. "No one else gets to determine that. Not your ex. Not this room. Not anyone." The words sank deep, hitting wounds still raw. She blinked rapidly, unwilling to let him see how much it mattered, but he already knew. He traced his thumb lightly across her knuckles, the motion so small yet so steady it sent shivers down her spine. That night he continued, his voice quieter now. "You took my hand because you needed protection. But tonight I want only one thing: honesty. No pretending, no masks, just you." Her breath caught. She looked down at their joined hands, at the strength in his fingers, and wondered how he could make something so simple feel like a vow. For a moment she considered pulling away, retreating into the safety of distance. But the warmth of his grip held her still. "Honesty," she repeated softly. "I don't even know what that looks like anymore. I've spent so long trying to be what someone else wanted me to be." His eyes darkened, yet his voice was steady. "Then let this be the place where you stop. You do not need to prove yourself here." She drew in a shaky breath. "You make it sound easy." "It is not easy," he admitted, "but it is necessary." The second course arrived, a tender cut of steak she could barely taste. She was too aware of every movement, every brush of his hand. When he refilled her water, every lingering glance that held more weight than words. The meal passed in fragments, but the thread that connected it all was the unbroken contact of his hand. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate soufflé, she realized she had stopped trembling. For the first time in years, she felt safe. When the evening ended, he escorted her outside. The night air was cool, scented faintly with rain, the city lights glowing like 1,000 watchful eyes. She hesitated at the curb, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Why me? You could have anyone. Why step into my mess?" He studied her for a long moment, his silence heavier than speech. Then with deliberate care, he lifted her hand once more, pressing it firmly between both of his. "Because when you reached for me, you reminded me what it feels like to matter. And I do not let go of things that matter." Her chest tightened, a storm of emotions rising within her. Gratitude, fear, longing, disbelief, all clashing at once. She wanted to argue, to push him away, before she drowned in this tide. But his grip steadied her again, strong and certain. And against her better judgment, she let him hold on. The days following their dinner blurred into a strange blend of quiet normalcy and restless anticipation. She tried to lose herself in work, though the suspension from her manager lingered like a shadow, and her colleagues' whispers followed her every step. Yet the memory of his hand across the table lingered longer than the gossip. That touch had etched itself into her, a promise of safety she did not know she needed. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the skyline and painted the city in streaks of fire and ash, he called her directly for the first time. His voice carried through the receiver with a calm command that made her sit straighter on her worn sofa. "Walk with me," he said. "No restaurants, no cameras, just you and me." Curiosity tangled with fear, but she agreed, and an hour later she found herself stepping out of a car onto a quiet rooftop garden that overlooked the glittering city below. He was already there, leaning against the stone balustrade, the weight of the world hidden behind the lines of his broad shoulders. She approached hesitantly, wrapping her arms around herself as if to shield from the cool air. And when he turned, the city lights cast shadows across his face, softening the sharpness of his features. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I wanted you to see me without the noise." She frowned lightly. Without the noise. He gestured to the skyline, to the world that spun around them. The cameras, the headlines, the money. None of that is me. At least, not all of me. His voice dropped lower, and she felt the weight of something long buried surfacing. My father believed strength was silence. My mother believed love was weakness. They raised me to build walls so high no one could climb them. And I did. But when you took my hand that night, I realized I wanted someone to see what is inside those walls. His honesty startled her. She had expected charm, or perhaps indifference, not the raw edge of a wound barely healed. She stepped closer despite herself. "Why are you telling me this?" He looked down at her, his eyes dark and searching. "Because you understand what it is to be underestimated, to be told you are not enough. You know what it feels like to have people laugh at your place in the world. And yet you stood there trembling, humiliated, and still you found the courage to reach for me. That matters." Her throat tightened. For years her ex had made her feel small, as though she should apologize for taking up space, for daring to want more than the narrow role he carved for her. Even after their breakup, his words haunted her in every job interview, every new friendship, every glance in the mirror. But this man, this billionaire with the world at his feet, was looking at her as though she were his equal. "You think I'm strong?" she whispered, a tremor in her voice. He reached for her hand again, enclosing it firmly, deliberately, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. "I know you are. I can feel it right here." Her heart squeezed the undulation of emotions, cresting shame, melting into warmth, fear dissolving into connection. For a moment they simply stood in silence, the city humming beneath them, the weight of his hand grounding her. Then, almost reluctantly, she pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "You don't know everything. About me. About what he did." Her voice broke, but once the words began, they spilled like water breaching a dam. "He made me feel worthless, like I was nothing more than an accessory, a girl too plain, too ordinary to ever deserve a seat at his table. And when I tried to leave, he told me no one else would want me, that I would always be less." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, shame twisting her chest, even as she forced the truth out. I started to believe him. The billionaire's expression, hardened fury glinting in his gaze, though his voice remained calm. He was wrong, every word. He stripped you down because he feared your strength. Weak men do that. Strong men lift others higher. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the gentleness beneath his stern tone. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, silent tears streaking down her cheeks. He stepped closer, not crowding her but steadying her, his hand finding hers again. He squeezed not too tight, just enough to remind her she was not alone. "Do you feel that?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her tears falling faster. "That is real, that is truth. Nothing he said can erase this." She exhaled shakily, and for the first time in years, the shame felt lighter, diluted by the strength of his presence. Vulnerability had always been dangerous, a weapon others used to hurt her. But with him, it became something else, connection. She looked at him, her vision blurred, and whispered, "Why me?" He studied her for a long moment, then lifted their joined hands between them, letting the city light shimmer across their skin. Because you reached for me without knowing who I was. You reached not for power, not for money, but for survival. And I saw someone who deserved to be more than a target for cruelty. I saw someone who deserved to be chosen. Her breath caught her tears stilled, and something unfamiliar bloomed in her chest beneath. The rooftop garden blurred into the background as the world shrank to the warmth of his hand and the steady weight of his gaze. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory that trust like this could shatter her all over again. But in that moment, she did not care. All she cared about was the simple, undeniable truth pressing between their palms. For the first time since the gala, since long before the ex who had broken her spirit, she felt like herself again, whole, seen. And as the night deepened and the city lights blinked like stars, she held onto his hand without hesitation, daring to believe she might never have to let go. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, but for her the world had tilted, realigned around the memory of his hand on hers. Days turned into weeks, and their encounters became more frequent, each one deepening the invisible tether between them. It was no longer just the memory of one desperate grasp in a ballroom. Now it was shared conversations over late dinners, fleeting smiles across crowded rooms, the brush of fingers when passing a glass. Each contact left sparks subtle yet undeniable. She told herself it was temporary, a strange arrangement that would eventually dissolve. But when he invited her to accompany him to a high-profile charity gala, she found herself saying yes without hesitation. The venue pulsed with opulence, marble staircases lined with photographers' chandeliers, glittering like captured starlight. When he extended his arm, she hesitated only a fraction before placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. The heat of his presence spread through her, steadying her trembling nerves. Together they walked into the sea of flashing cameras, and for the first time she did not feel like prey. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Guests in gowns and tuxedos whispered as they entered, eyes flickering with speculation. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing on her shoulders, but every time doubt threatened to crush her, he would lean closer, his hand brushing hers, reminding her she was not alone. They mingled briefly, his confidence a shield she borrowed with every breath. Then came the moment she dreaded most. Her ex appeared across the room, his new partner clinging to his arm, his smile sharp as broken glass. He wasted no time before approaching, his voice dripping with poison. "So it is true," he sneered. The nobody found herself a savior. She stiffened, but before she could respond, the billionaire turned his gaze on the man, his tone cutting through the air like steel. "She does not need saving," he said evenly. "She needs respect, something you clearly know nothing about." The ex's face flushed, and though he forced a laugh, his eyes glinted with malice. He withdrew with a mocking bow, but she knew this would not be the end. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and speeches began, a different threat emerged. Screens lit up with breaking news headlines flashing across phones and murmurs spreading like wildfire. A video clip was circulating online, edited cruelly, to suggest she had begged him for money, snippets of her voice, spliced together with images of her at his side. The timing was calculated, the intent obvious. Gasps rippled through the room as phones were passed, hand to hand, judgment sharpening with every glance. Her stomach dropped, humiliation flooding her all over again. She wanted to run to hide, but his hand closed around hers, strong and steady, halting her retreat. He stood commanding attention with effortless authority, and when he spoke, the entire room fell silent. Enough, he said, his voice carrying across the gala floor. This woman stands with me, and I will not tolerate lies. Anyone who spreads this filth should be prepared to answer to me. The weight of his words silenced the whispers. Cameras clicked, guests froze, and she realized he had turned her scandal into a declaration. Her ex, standing at the edge of the crowd, paled visibly. The satisfaction on his face erased in an instant. She clutched his hand tightly, her heart racing her emotions. A torrent of relief fear and something more dangerous desire. When the evening finally ended, he led her outside to a private terrace overlooking the city. The cool night air kissed her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the man beside her, the one who had just risked his reputation to protect hers. They stood in silence until he finally turned his eyes, searching hers with quiet intensity. "You still doubt me?" he said softly. She swallowed the truth, too heavy to deny. "I don't know how not to. My entire life trust has been a weapon used against me. I want to believe this is real, but I am afraid." He stepped closer, his hand rising to brush a strand of hair from her face, before settling gently on her cheek. "Fear is natural," he murmured, "but you do not have to face it alone. Every time you think of running, remember this." He intertwined their fingers once more, his grip warm, unyielding. "I am here." Her chest ached with the force of her emotions, tears burning behind her eyes. She wanted to tell him everything she felt, that the safety of his hand was the only thing keeping her afloat, that she had not known hope until now. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she tightened her grip, choosing action over confession. He seemed to understand, his lips curving slightly in approval. They stood together in silence, the city sprawling endlessly before them, their hands clasped as though it were the only truth that mattered. Yet beneath the warmth of that moment lay a darker undercurrent. She knew her ex was not finished. The video had been his work, a desperate attempt to destroy what he could no longer control. And though the billionaire's declaration had silenced the room, the battle outside those walls was only beginning. Still, as she leaned into the comfort of his touch, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of peace. The future was uncertain, the storm was far from over, but tonight she chose to believe in the strength of his hand, the promise of his presence, and the possibility that even after everything she was worthy of love. The scandal did not vanish overnight, but the force of his public defense at the gala shifted the tide. For the first time, she was not painted solely as a desperate woman, clinging to wealth, but as someone mysterious enough to warrant protection from a man who never wasted words. That shift bought her breathing room, yet it also deepened her confusion. Nights were restless, her mind replaying the feel of his fingers, entwined with hers, the certainty in his voice when he declared she stood with him. The question haunted her, why would a man like him care enough to risk his reputation for her? A week later, he invited her again, but this time not to a gala or restaurant. Instead, she was ushered by a private elevator to the rooftop terrace of his penthouse, a space far removed from flashing cameras. Glass walls opened to the skyline, and lanterns flickered in the evening breeze. He stood waiting, jacket, discarded sleeves rolled back, to reveal the strength of his forearms, his posture relaxed, yet commanding. She hesitated on the threshold, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the setting. He gestured toward the terrace with a quiet smile. "This is where I come when I want to remember who I am without the noise. I thought you might want the same." She stepped outside, the cool air brushing her skin, the city lights stretching endlessly below. For a moment they stood in silence, the hum of traffic far beneath them, the weight of unspoken things pressing between them. Then he moved closer, not abruptly, but with the steady patience of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. He held out his hand. She looked at it, hesitant, remembering every time she had grasped it in fear or desperation. This time she placed her palm against his, deliberately her choice clear. He closed his fingers around hers, strong and warm, and something inside her softened. "You always do that," she murmured. "Hold my hand like it means more than it should." His eyes locked on hers, steady and unyielding. "Because it does." Her breath caught, and the air between them thickened with something undeniable. They talked for hours, not about business or society, but about the fractures that made them human. He told her of the loneliness that came with power of the walls he had built so high that no one dared climb them. She told him of the years she spent shrinking herself to fit into someone else's vision of the voice of her ex that still echoed in her head. Their words were confessions raw and unpolished, and with each revelation, the distance between them closed. At one point, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper, "I am terrified of this, of you, of what it could mean." He did not flinch. Instead, he lifted their joined hands, brushing his lips gently across her knuckles. The gesture was reverent, intimate, sending a shiver through her entire body. "Then be terrified," he said softly. "But do not run. Fear means you have something worth holding on to." Her eyes blurred with unshed tears, the rhythm of her emotions crashing again. Fear, longing, hope, disbelief. She leaned into the sensation of his hand, choosing not to pull away. Hours slipped by until the city grew quiet, and when she finally rose to leave, he walked her to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, she whispered, "One day this will end, won't it? You and me." His gaze held hers unshaken. "Not if you do not let go." In the days that followed, they continued to meet, always in spaces away from the public eye. A hidden cafe, a walk through Central Park at dawn, a drive down the coast where no cameras followed. Each encounter stitched them closer together. The chemistry that had begun as a spark now burned steady, undeniable. And yet, even as her heart leaned toward him, doubt lingered. One evening, standing once again on his terrace, she voiced the question that had gnawed at her. "How can this be real? A man like you, a woman like me. We come from different worlds. Eventually, that difference will tear us apart." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers once more, fingers weaving tightly with deliberate finality. "Do you remember the first night? You did not know who I was. You reached for me because you needed someone to stand beside you. That is what matters. Not the worlds we come from, but the truth we create together." She wanted to believe him desperately, and in that moment, feeling the certainty of his grip, she almost did. She gazed at the city, stretched out like a universe of lights, and thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a place where she belonged. Not in marble ballrooms or glittering galas, but here in the warmth of his hand, in the quiet spaces where honesty lived. Still fear whispered its doubts. Her ex had not disappeared, and she knew he was watching, waiting for another chance to strike. But for this moment, she let herself breathe, let herself feel the pulse of connection that grew stronger each day. She turned her face toward him, whispering the question she had not dared before. What if I am not enough? His answer came without hesitation, firm and certain, his hand tightening around hers. You already are. The words hit her with the force of truth, undoing years of cruelty and self-doubt. Tears slipped free, but she did not hide them. Instead, she leaned closer, letting her forehead rest briefly against his chest, the steady beat of his heart echoing against her own. They stood like that, two souls stitched together by choice, by trust, by the simple act of holding on. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in something more than survival. She allowed herself to believe in love. The fragile peace they had built did not last. She should have known it would not. Happiness had always felt borrowed, and the debt always came due. It began with a message that landed in her inbox one gray morning, a subject line that made her stomach twist urgent. Attached was an email fabricated but disturbingly convincing, alleging that she had once stolen money from her ex. The text was littered with doctored screenshots of bank transfers and falsified conversations that painted her as manipulative and greedy. She stared at the screen, her pulse hammering as dread pooled in her chest. Before she could process the cruelty of it, the story broke online. Articles multiplied like wildfire headlines, screaming accusations she had no way to disprove quickly enough. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls. She refused to answer messages filled with pity, anger, and suspicion. By the time she reached her office, the damage was already done. Her manager looked at her with regret in his eyes, his voice soft but final. We have to suspend you indefinitely. Until this clears, we cannot risk our reputation. The words hollowed her out. She left the building with the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, every step heavier than the last. That evening she met him, desperate for reassurance, for the steady calm of his hand. He listened without interruption as she poured out the horror of the day, the false accusations, the humiliation, the fear that no matter how false the claims were, they would stick to her forever. For a moment, she thought she saw rage flicker across his features, but then his expression settled into unreadable calm. I will handle this, he said at last. My legal team will trace the source. My PR advisors will dismantle the lies. But for now, I need you to trust me. She nodded, relief and gratitude flooding her. But even as he held her hand, something in his eyes seemed distant, calculating. Days turned into weeks, and though she heard little from him, headlines shifted. Reports emerged of an investigation into digital forgery whispers that someone was targeting her deliberately. Yet his absence during those days hollowed her. Calls went unanswered, texts received delayed, cryptic responses. She told herself he was busy, that men like him had empires to run, but the doubt gnawed at her. Her ex's shadow crept closer. She saw him once across a cafe, his smirk wide, as if he were savoring her collapse. She hurried away, heart pounding, the echo of his old taunts crawling through her veins. That night, when she lay awake in the silence of her apartment, the fear bloomed into certainty she was losing him. When she finally confronted him, her voice cracked with the weight of all her questions. Why are you pulling away? You promised you would not let go. He looked at her for a long time, his jaw tight, and then he said words that shattered her. Sometimes distance is protection. You may not see it now, but I am trying to shield you. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered back, "It feels like abandonment." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away the first time she had ever done so. The emptiness that followed was unbearable, the absence of his warmth, colder than anything she had endured before. She walked out that night with her chest splintered, each step echoing like betrayal. Her ex's laughter filled the void in her mind, every cruel word he had ever spoken rising to the surface. Alone again, she spiraled. The world seemed too heavy, the lies too convincing, the silence from him too deep. The one anchor she had trusted most felt gone. Her hands shook each time she checked her phone, hoping for a message that never came. She wanted to believe he was working in the shadows for her, but the wound of his distance bled too deeply. One evening she found herself standing at the same ballroom where everything had begun, the memory of chandeliers and cruelty haunting her. She imagined again the warmth of his hand that had saved her the shield he had given without question. And then she imagined it gone forever. The contrast tore her apart. Crisis had come, and it felt like betrayal, even if part of her heart whispered he was protecting her. But the louder voice, the one scarred by years of cruelty, said he had abandoned her like everyone else. That night, lying in bed with tears streaking her pillow, she realized she had let go of his hand, not just physically, but emotionally. The thread that tied them together had snapped, and the emptiness left behind was the cruelest of all. She told herself she would survive, that she had survived worse, but a hollow truth lingered. This time she was not sure she wanted to survive without him. The days that followed were a blur of silence and despair, until one morning her phone lit up with a flood of notifications, not of fresh accusations, but of breaking news. Headlines screamed about a scandal, not hers this time, but her ex's. Evidence had surfaced proving he had fabricated emails, doctored bank transfers, and orchestrated the smear campaign to ruin her. Screenshots from his private accounts were leaked, his own arrogance caught in writing, as he boasted to a friend about destroying her life for rejecting him. She read every line in disbelief, her breath catching tears pricking her eyes, as the truth unfolded in front of the world. For the first time in months, she was no longer the target. She was the victim who had been wronged, and her ex was the fraud exposed. Relief surged through her like fire, but the victory was laced with bitterness. Why had she been forced to suffer so long to lose her job, her dignity, her peace before justice came? Yet amid the chaos of headlines and phone calls from journalists begging for her side, one thought drowned out the rest. Him. She had not heard from the billionaire since their last confrontation, when his distance had felt like betrayal. But now she understood. The articles mentioned the investigation, the digital trail traced back the teams who had worked quietly to dismantle the lies. It had been him all along, fighting battles behind the curtain, protecting her even while she doubted. Shame and longing crashed together in her chest. That evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, he stood there taller than memory, his expression unreadable, but his presence overwhelming. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he lifted his hand, palm open, waiting. "I never left," he said quietly. "I have been here the whole time fighting for you. I needed distance so I could do what had to be done, without dragging you deeper into the storm. But I was never gone." Her throat tightened, words tangled by tears. "I thought you abandoned me. I thought I meant nothing to you." His eyes softened and he stepped closer, his hand still outstretched. "You mean everything. I asked you to trust me, but I know I failed to show you what that meant. So now I am here not asking but proving. You are safe, you are free, and I am still here waiting for you to take my hand." She stared at him, the memories crashing down, the first desperate grasp at the gala, the steady warmth in the restaurant, the rooftop confession, the painful emptiness when she had let go. Her chest ached with the weight of it all, but through the haze of tears, she saw the truth in his eyes. He had never let go. Trembling, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. The moment their palms met, the world tilted back into place. Relief burst through her, followed by a rush of gratitude, so fierce it left her breathless. Tears spilled freely as she whispered, "I am sorry. I should have trusted you." He shook his head, squeezing her hand firmly. "No, you should not have to fight alone. I should have told you more. Explained instead of disappearing. But we are here now, and that is what matters." The silence between them was thick with everything unspoken, yet their joined hands spoke louder than words. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt steady again, anchored by the certainty of his presence. Redemption did not erase the pain, but it gave it purpose. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest, the steady beat of his heart echoing in her ears. He wrapped his free arm around her, holding her close, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more than survival. She believed in love, fragile yet resilient, born of brokenness yet stronger because of it. As the city lights flickered outside her window, she tightened her grip, vowing silently never to let go again. The storm had passed, but the scars remained reminders of how fragile reputations could be and how cruel people could become when fueled by envy and spite. Yet standing with him now, her hand securely wrapped in his, she felt the weight of the past lift slowly, piece by piece. In the weeks that followed, she began to rebuild not alone, but with him at her side. He made no secret of their bond, appearing with her at gatherings, letting the world see their clasped hands as a symbol that the lies no longer had power. Each time, flashes erupted from cameras and murmurs rose from crowds. He only tightened his grip, silent but resolute, and the whispers softened into reluctant respect. She returned to her office eventually, her manager offering an apology that was both awkward and sincere. The company reinstated her role, acknowledging the truth that had been revealed. Though colleagues still watched her with curiosity, it was no longer the gaze of suspicion, but of fascination. She worked diligently, determined to reclaim her dignity, not through headlines but through the steady rhythm of her own efforts. At night, when the city quieted, she often found herself on his terrace again, the skyline stretching endlessly before them. Those nights were filled with confessions, spoken in low voices, laughter that surprised her with its ease, and moments of silence that carried more intimacy than words. The motif of their hands continued small touches that steadied her deliberate entwining of fingers that became their unspoken vow. He would reach for her hand in meetings in cars, in quiet kitchens where they shared late-night meals, as if reminding her and himself that no matter the noise outside, they were connected. One evening, months after the scandal had been buried beneath fresher news, he took her to another gala. This time she walked in, not as the trembling woman mocked by her ex, but as someone transformed. Her dress shimmered under the chandeliers, her posture steady, her gaze level. He stood beside her, tall and commanding, but his attention never wavered from her. At the center of the room, reporters whispered, guests craned their necks, but neither of them faltered. He raised their joined hands deliberately, a quiet gesture that rippled louder than any statement. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, sealing it into memory. Later that night, after the gala ended and the city outside hushed into darkness, he led her to the quiet rooftop where their most vulnerable truths had been shared. Lanterns glowed softly, the air crisp, the silence deep. He turned to her, his eyes unguarded, his expression open in a way she had never seen. When you first reached for me, you did not know who I was. You did not care about the money, the power, the name. You just needed someone, and I needed to be needed. That moment changed everything for me. Her chest tightened, emotions surging, her voice trembling when she asked, "What are you saying?" He stepped closer, lifting her hand between them, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "I am saying I do not want this to end. Not tonight, not ever. Second chances are rare. You gave me mine, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I will never let go again." The city stretched behind him like a sea of stars, but all she could see was the man before her, the steadiness in his eyes, the certainty in his touch. Tears welled as she whispered, "Are you asking me?" His smile was small, tender, breaking through the usual calm of his face. "I am asking you to be mine. Not as a shield, not as a secret, but as everything." She could barely breathe through the swell of emotions. The girl who had once been mocked, belittled, discarded, now stood on the precipice of something she had never believed she deserved. She did not hesitate this time. She placed her hand firmly in his, squeezing with all the certainty she had once lacked. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He pulled her into his arms, and the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to beat in unison. The kiss that followed was not fiery or desperate, but deep and grounding, sealing their vow without need for words. Months later, their story culminated in another ballroom, this one not filled with mockery but with joy. Friends, colleagues, even skeptics gathered as they stood hand in hand at the center of the room, the chandeliers glowing above like blessings. When the officiant pronounced them, he turned to her with that same quiet smile and whispered, "Forever begins now." She laughed through tears, knowing it was true. Epilogue. Years later, they would often walk through the park on Sunday afternoons, their hands still entwined as naturally as breathing. Children's laughter echoed around them, and the chaos of the world seemed distant. Sometimes she would glance at their joined hands and remember the night it all began, the trembling grasp of desperation that had tethered her to him. It had started as a lifeline, but had become a promise, a vow of forever. No more pretending, no more running, just two souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest of places and held on tightly enough to withstand every storm. And as the seasons turned and life unfolded, one truth remained unshaken. His hand never let go of hers.